Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
This all happened about a month ago, and it's already been reported. Still, it was one of the most unsettling situations I've ever been in, and from what we've heard, the police are taking it seriously. Ours wasn't the only report that came in from that area around the same time, and apparently one of the other incidents ended much worse. What happened to us was bad enough, no question, but I'm here telling it, which means we made it out. Not everyone did. From what I understand, at least one person involved in a separate report didn't survive, or is still missing, which is why the investigation hasn't been brushed off as just another hiker story. It happened deep inside the Great Smoky Mountains, not near the edge, not on any marked route, but well within a section of forest most people don't even realize exists anymore. There used to be a trail there years ago, one that was actually pretty popular back in the 90s, but it was shut down abruptly and, as far as anyone knows, never officially explained. These days, it's not just closed, it's gone. No signs, no maintenance, nothing to suggest it was ever meant for people to walk through. You wouldn't end up there by accident. It was me, along with 3 close friends, Emily, Sarah, and Lucas. 2 guys, 2 women, all of us having known each other long enough that silence between us never felt awkward, and conversations could pick up exactly where they'd left off, even if months had passed. We'd been talking about doing a trip like this for years, ever since we were younger and had more time than responsibility. Back then, hiking wasn't something we had to plan around work schedules or deadlines. We just went. But things change fast when you step into adult life, and suddenly it feels like you have to prove yourself constantly just to move forward a little. That kind of pressure has a way of pushing aside the things that actually matter, friendships, moments like these, the kind you don't realize you're missing until too much time has gone by. So we decided to make it happen, no excuses this time. And Lucas, being who he is, immediately suggested we check out that abandoned trail. He's always been into obscure topics, the kind of guy who reads about unsolved disappearances or forgotten places and turns it into something halfway between curiosity and entertainment. When he mentioned that trail, there was something about it that caught our attention. A place that was just odd enough to make you want to see it for yourself, right in the middle of one of the most visited national parks in the country. Getting there wasn't simple. We had to hike for about a day and a half just to reach the area where the trail used to run, and there were no roads leading anywhere close, no cabins that we knew of, no signs of recent human activity at all. By the time we finally reached what we believed was the old path, we'd already covered hours of dense forest, moving through terrain that felt untouched, like we were pushing into a space that had quietly reclaimed itself. Looking back, the fact that we made it out at all feels more like luck than anything else. I remember we'd been walking for several hours that day, maybe 5, maybe a bit less, when we started thinking about setting up camp. The light was beginning to shift, not quite sunset yet, but enough to remind us that out there, darkness comes fast and without warning. That's when Sarah spoke up. She asked if anyone else felt off. Not tired, not sick, just watched. She didn't say it in any dramatic way, just a quiet question, like she wasn't even sure she should have said it out loud. What made it stick was that it came from her. Out of all of us, Sarah has always had sharper instincts, shaped by things she's gone through that she doesn't talk about much. She notices details most people miss, and when something doesn't sit right with her, there's usually a reason, even if we can't see it yet. Hearing that from her didn't spark panic, but it did shift something in the air. We all stopped, looked around, listening more carefully than before. I even stepped away from the spot we'd picked and walked a little further out, scanning the trees, trying to catch any movement or sound that didn't belong. I didn't find anything. Nothing clear, nothing I could point to and say, that's it. But from that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling completely. It wasn't overwhelming, more like something different, easy to ignore if you tried, but hard to forget once it had been mentioned. We talked it over and decided to move. Even though we'd already started setting things up, it didn't feel worth the risk, whatever that meant at the time. So we packed everything back up and pushed on for another hour, maybe a little more, until we found a different spot. By then, the light was fading quickly, and we had to work fast if we didn't want to be building camp in complete darkness. We followed the same routine as the night before, set up the tents, cleared a small area for a fire. Kept it controlled, just enough to cook and keep some warmth. Dinner was simple, the kind of dehydrated meals you just add hot water to. Nothing special, but it did the job. We were sitting around the fire, talking, when we heard it. It wasn't loud, not something that would make you jump immediately. Just a sound in the distance, like something moving through leaves or brushing against tree bark. Normally, the forest is full of those noises. They blend together, become background without you realizing it. But this one stood out. It didn't match the rest, didn't fade into the environment the way it should have. It lingered just enough to make all of us notice at the same time. Emily and I got up first, grabbed our flashlights, and moved away from the fire to get a better look. The light from the flames only reached so far, and beyond that, everything was just shapes and shadows. Our flashlights were strong, cutting through the dark in narrow beams as we swept them across the trees, the ground, any space where something could be hiding. We didn't see anything. No movement, no reflection, no sign that whatever made that noise was still there. So after a few minutes, we headed back. We stayed up for a while longer after that, probably another couple of hours, talking about random things, nothing related to what we'd heard. Eventually, one by one, we turned in for the night. I've never been a great sleeper, especially outdoors, and I tend to wake up at least once or twice during the night. That's just how it's always been, and it doesn't help that my sleep gets lighter in unfamiliar places. That night, I woke up not long after lying down, maybe 15 minutes, maybe a bit more. I realized I hadn't gone to the bathroom before getting into the tent, which I usually make a point of doing. I'd had a bit to drink earlier, nothing excessive, just enough that I knew it was going to catch up with me sooner rather than later. So, I decided to get up before it became impossible to ignore. I moved as quietly as I could, since we'd all just gone to sleep, and we're still in that light phase where any small noise can wake you up. I didn't want to disturb anyone, especially Sarah, because I knew that if she heard something and didn't immediately understand what it was, she wouldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Because of that, I didn't even turn the flashlight on. I just stepped away from the tent slowly until I was far enough to take care of what I needed. I had my phone with me and the proper flashlight as well, the stronger one, but I kept both off at first. While I was there, I heard something again, a faint noise coming from a bit further ahead, not directly from the campsite, but close enough to notice. I walked a little in that direction, still trying to stay quiet, thinking it was probably a small animal. I knew that if I went back without checking, I wouldn't be able to relax, so I moved a bit further out to confirm it. It turned out to be a small rodent, not exactly a rat, something similar, just going about its usual business. Then I turned back toward the camp. That's when everything went to hell. As soon as I started walking back, I heard a different sound, this time clearly coming from the direction of the tents. I slowed down, expecting that maybe one of them had gotten up for the same reason I had. But as I got closer, I saw someone who wasn't part of our group. There was no confusion about it. It was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in dark clothing, and the way he moved made it clear he wasn't just passing through. He was heading straight toward the tents, carefully, deliberately, trying not to make noise. In his hand, I could clearly see a blade. From where I stood, there was no doubt about what it was. I didn't have anything with me to defend myself. Everything we had brought for protection was inside the tents. I hadn't even thought about taking anything when I stepped out, which, looking back, was a serious mistake. But there wasn't time to think about that. My reaction wasn't something I planned, it just happened. I grabbed my phone, opened a video from a shooting range session Sarah and I had done the week before, and shouted that I had a gun. At the same time, I pointed the flashlight straight at him. Right after I yelled, the video played, and you could hear the sound of a shot. Even now, I don't fully understand why it worked. The volume on my phone wasn't even that high, and the sound itself was clearly artificial, flat, like it was coming through a speaker. To me, it didn't sound convincing at all. But he reacted instantly. Maybe it was the suddenness of it, or the fact that the light was strong enough that he couldn't see me clearly, couldn't confirm whether I was bluffing or not. He didn't hesitate. He turned and ran in the opposite direction, straight into the forest, disappearing faster than I expected. By that point, the others were already coming out of the tents, startled and confused. Sarah had her weapon in hand, asking what was going on. I explained as quickly as I could, trying to stay clear and direct. The situation didn't feel real, even as I was describing it, but the fact that we had just seconds between nothing happening and something potentially going very wrong wasn't lost on any of us. It reminded me of a case I had heard about years ago, somewhere in Europe. I don't remember exactly where. A group of young people on a trip, things turning violent, one individual responsible, using the same blade more than once. I'm not going into details, but the outcome was as bad as it gets. Standing there, it was hard not to think about how close we might have been to something similar, especially since we were split between two tents. It wouldn't have taken much. We didn't go back to sleep after that. None of us even suggested it. We stayed outside for the rest of the night, positioned in a way where we could watch all directions, keeping the fire going, staying alert. This time, we had everything with us. No one spoke much. It wasn't panic, just focus, the kind that comes when you know you need to stay aware of every small detail around you. As soon as the first light came up, we packed everything and left immediately. We didn't take unnecessary breaks. Didn't stop until we reached an area where there were park rangers and some level of oversight again. We reported everything, gave as much detail as we could. They asked me to describe the man, and I did my best. I didn't get a clear look at his eyes, but I saw enough to say he was white, had a full beard, and was physically large. I'm not a small guy myself, but he was noticeably bigger than me, both in height and build. About a week and a half later, I was contacted again and asked to come in and see if I could identify anyone they had picked up in the area. They showed me several individuals. Even with the limited view I had that night, I was sure none of them were the same person. The difference in size alone ruled them out. What stayed with me, though, was the fact that there were multiple people being considered in connection to incidents in that same region. I don't know why they were there or what they were doing, but the idea that several individuals could have been moving through that part of the forest at the same time for reasons no one can clearly explain is difficult to ignore. As far as I know, the investigation is still ongoing. I don't know what they'll find, or if they'll find anything at all. But whoever that man was, he wasn't lost, and he wasn't just passing through. It's scary to think we were just minutes away from ending up as a story on the news. I don't know if the story I'm about to tell is particularly well told, or if I even have much of a talent for telling it. But it was frightening enough that it stuck with me, and it happened about 5 years ago in the Great Smoky Mountains. In a section of the Appalachians where I thought I knew what I was doing. I wouldn't say I'm extremely experienced when it comes to camping or climbing, but I'm not a beginner either. I'd put myself somewhere in the middle, comfortable enough to go out alone, but not arrogant about it. At the time, I was planning a short 2-day climb, nothing too intense. The incline wasn't particularly steep, and overall, it was supposed to be manageable. Still, that trip taught me 2 things very clearly. The first being that I finally understand why people say they would rather run into a wild animal than another person out there. Because with an animal, you can at least predict behavior to some extent. But with people, you have no idea what's going on in their head, and that uncertainty is where things get dangerous. The second thing is that when people share stories like this, there's always someone behind a screen saying they would have acted differently, that certain decisions were stupid, and I used to agree with that to some extent, because sometimes people do take unnecessary risks. But the truth is, most of those people have never been in a situation where something feels genuinely wrong, and they don't know how they would actually react. I didn't react the way I thought I would. I didn't react in what would probably be considered the smartest way, but I'm here telling it. And because of that, I don't judge reactions the same way anymore. Everyone responds differently when things go wrong. What happened started when I parked my car at the beginning of a trail. I noticed there were 3 other vehicles there besides mine. All pickup trucks, different models and years, but similar enough to stand out. Inside one of them, there was a man sitting in the driver's seat, just watching me. I didn't think too much of it at first. I gave a small wave, mostly just to acknowledge that I'd seen him, and he waved back. But then he opened the door and started walking toward me. That immediately put me a little on edge. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because I hadn't intended to start any conversation. I was just being polite. Still, he came over and started asking basic questions, whether I was planning to climb, if I had done it before, if I knew the area. I kept my answers general, not trying to be rude, because sometimes being dismissive can lead to strange reactions, and also because I didn't have a real reason to be unfriendly. Some people are just curious, and that's fine. After a short exchange, I told him I needed to get moving because I didn't want to lose daylight. The area I had in mind wasn't right next to the trailhead, and I wanted to reach it before dark. He said something along the lines of, "Sure." I didn't catch it clearly, and then he went back to his truck while I grabbed my gear and started hiking. About 2 hours into the trail, I heard something behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me stop. Instinctively, I stepped off the trail and positioned myself behind a cluster of trees, not fully hiding, but enough to stay out of direct view. Less than a minute later, I saw him. It was the same man from the pickup, walking along the trail I had just been on, looking around in a way that didn't feel casual, more like he was checking the area. My first thought was that he might be looking for me, that he had followed me and was trying to figure out where I had gone. At the same time, I tried to stay reasonable about it, because it was still a public trail. He had every right to be there. It was entirely possible he was just hiking like I was, maybe even stopping to look around at the surroundings. I hadn't asked him what his plans were, and he hadn't told me, so there was a plausible explanation. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I wasn't willing to ignore the feeling completely. So I let him get far ahead, waited until I couldn't see him anymore, and then made a decision that changed the rest of the trip. Instead of continuing deeper, I turned back, planning to camp much closer to my car. If anything happened, I wanted a clear way out. Something I could reach quickly without having to think twice. I waited around 15 minutes before moving again, just to be sure he had enough distance ahead of me, and then I started heading back. At that point, I thought that would be the end of it, just an uncomfortable interaction that didn't lead anywhere. By the time the day was coming to an end, I set up camp not far from the trailhead, maybe a 15-minute walk from my car, close enough that I could get there quickly if needed. I put up my tent, got a small fire going, and tried to settle into the evening. It was around 11:30 at night when he showed up again. He walked straight into my campsite and started talking to me like nothing had happened. At that point, my stress level was already high, and my reaction was sharper than before. I asked him what he was doing there, whether he had been following me, and told him I had already seen him on the trail earlier. He immediately went on the defensive, telling me to calm down, saying he hadn't followed me, that he had gone further up the trail and was now heading back to his truck, and that he had seen my fire and decided to come over and say hello. It didn't sound convincing. I told him that was fine, but that I wanted to be left alone, that he should keep going. He said something I didn't fully catch, stepped away from the campsite, and eventually moved off, still muttering under his breath. But that was the moment I knew it was no longer safe to stay there. The man had clearly been thrown off by my reaction, and I didn't know him at all. It was obvious he had been following me, and like I said before, I was already uncomfortable, and I wasn't going to ignore that just to avoid overreacting. Even though I trusted my physical ability to some extent, I had no idea what he was capable of. And that wasn't a risk worth taking. So I packed up immediately. Not everything, just the essentials, the expensive gear, and the things I needed to get back safely, and I started heading down. I didn't follow the main trail directly. Instead, I moved along a parallel path where I could still see the trail but wasn't fully exposed on it. I kept a steady pace, faster than I normally would, focused on getting back to the car as quickly as possible. But not even 10 minutes into that descent, I saw him again. This time, he wasn't alone. He was coming up the trail with 2 other men, and they were carrying firearms. The moment I saw them, my body just locked up. I moved off to the side, staying low between the trees, making sure they couldn't see me. I watched them pass, heading toward the area where I had just been. I waited a couple of minutes after they were gone, just to be sure they were far enough not to hear me, and then I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the car. I got inside, locked the doors, and drove out of there immediately. As soon as I had some distance, I called the police and reported everything. They responded faster than I expected. Within about 18 minutes, they were already in the area where I had been. They called me back to say the pickup was still there, but there were no signs of the men. Later, I found out the truck had been reported stolen 4 days earlier. After that, I never heard anything else. No updates, no follow-up that led anywhere I could see. What I do know is that if I hadn't trusted that initial feeling, if I had ignored it, or tried to rationalize everything away, things could have ended very differently. I don't think I did anything that would have provoked them, nothing that would justify them targeting me, but the fact that it started with that conversation and continued the way it did was enough for me to understand their intentions weren't good. That's the reason I'm telling this. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't worry about being polite or about whether you're overthinking it. It's better to cut a good plan short than to stay and regret it later because you didn't listen to yourself. I don't know if any of this is true anymore. Around these mountains, truth gets worn down the same way the ridgelines do, slowly, by weather and repetition. Stories survive longer than records here, older than county lines, older than churches, sometimes older than names themselves. If you spend enough time in the far western edge of North Carolina, near the old spine of the Appalachians, where Clay County folds into Cherokee land and the ridges run south toward Georgia, you eventually hear people mention Chunky Gal Hollow. Not directly at first, usually sideways. A warning disguised as a joke. A road someone tells you not to take after dark. A fishing spot nobody fishes anymore. Again, I don't know whether this is a made-up story or not. I believe that, like any other story passed down from generation to generation, it is part truth and part invention, with each new century adding more pieces to it. But whether invented or not, it shapes many of the choices made by people who live in this area, and it undoubtedly influenced much of my upbringing. Either way, the story is well known around here. And eventually, if the person speaking is old enough, or trusts you enough, they mention the lake. not by one name either. That is what made me start taking the story seriously. In archived survey notes from the 1800s, the water appears under different descriptions depending on who recorded it. Blackwater Sink, Widow's Basin, Hollow Lake, simply the still water east of Chunky Gal. The Cherokee families who remained in the region after removal reportedly avoided naming it altogether. One fragment collected in the late 1930s by a WPA oral history worker references the water that listens. The line was crossed out in pencil in the final transcript. The area itself is real enough. Chunky Gal Mountain exists. So does Chunky Gal Gap. The forest there is very dense, with steep hollows where fog settles and stays, where sound carries strangely, where distances feel bigger. The geography creates natural acoustic dead zones. Hunters still talk about it. You can stand less than a quarter mile from another person and hear absolutely nothing from them if the ridges fold the right way. Before the land became fragmented between Forest Service control, timber claims, and private inheritance disputes, several isolated families lived deep in those hollows year-round. Census records from the early 1800s show small settlements appearing and disappearing without explanation. Entire households simply vanish from later records. Usually historians attribute this to migration, disease, or clerical inconsistency. But in Clay County, there are gaps that locals still notice. Names removed from church rolls without burial dates. Cabins found abandoned with tools left inside. The earliest version of the lake story appears to date back to sometime between 1817 and 1824, though nobody agrees on the exact year. According to oral accounts collected from descendants in Brasstown and Tusquity, a family named either Ledford, Ledbetter, or Redfern, records differ depending on the speaker, settled near a small body of water deep in the hollow, beyond Chunky Gal Gap. What made the family unusual was not isolation. Everyone there was isolated. What stood out was permanence. While other settlers moved downhill after harsh winters or poor harvests, this family remained for generations on the same patch of land. People remembered them as stable, quiet, self-sufficient, and deeply religious. Which mattered, because people say the mountains respected stability more than money or success. The lake itself was considered strange long before the daughter died. Descriptions remain unnervingly consistent across nearly 2 centuries. The water was too cold in summer, too still in wind. Locals claimed leaves drifting onto the surface would sometimes stop moving entirely, as if caught in invisible glass. One account from 1856, supposedly copied from the journal of a circuit preacher traveling through Cherokee County, described the shoreline as lacking the ordinary conversation of frogs and insects. That detail repeats constantly with absence. No birds settling near the eastern bank, dogs refusing to enter the water, horses becoming agitated along a particular stretch of shore. One hunter in an 1891 account claimed he fired at a deer beside the lake and heard no echo return from the shot. Contrary to what most people who don't live here think, none of this was treated as supernatural at first. Appalachia has always produced practical explanations before mystical ones. The only difference is that the more supernatural explanations were more interesting, and so they were repeated and retold more often. But for the people who lived here and wanted to keep living here, it was important to find more practical explanations. People blamed mineral runoff, underground caverns, gas seepage. Some thought the basin connected to deeper, flooded cave systems beneath the mountain. A geological survey conducted unofficially in the 1930s supposedly attempted depth sounding and failed to find bottom beyond a certain distance from shore. Whether that story is true is impossible to verify. The survey records were either lost or never formally archived. Then came the story of the daughter. Her name changes depending on who tells it. Eleanor in some versions, Ruth in others. One elderly resident interviewed in Hayesville during the 1970s referred to her only as the oldest girl. But every version agrees on the sequence. She began sleepwalking shortly after her 17th birthday. At first, the behavior seemed harmless. Family members found her standing barefoot in the cabin at odd hours, facing the windows toward the lake. Sometimes she spoke quietly, though no one could understand the words. Her mother reportedly believed she was praying. Over the following months, the episodes worsened and she began leaving the house. Not wandering randomly, but walking directly toward the shoreline as if following instructions. Her brothers started barring the door at night. One account claims they tied bells to the handle so they would wake if she tried to leave again. Then came the night in November. Most versions place it during heavy fog near the first hard freeze. The family awoke to silence. Not a scream and not panic. Silence so complete it disturbed them awake before they understood why. That older woman, who described the girl as the eldest daughter, used to say that what people heard most in that area was not sound, but the absolute absence of it. As if that emptiness itself entered inside you and became louder than anything else. When they found the door open, she was already in the water. Her father allegedly said the lake opened rather than received her. Another account claims the surface barely moved at all. By the time the family reached the shore, the water had already gone still again. Her body was recovered the following morning, according to some stories. According to others, it surfaced 3 days later, nearly half a mile away, despite no visible outlet stream. A third version claims she was never found at all. Officially, the death was treated as accidental drowning. Unofficially, something changed afterward. Neighbors who had previously dismissed the family's concerns began avoiding the hollow entirely after sunset. Travelers reported disorientation near the lake. Men familiar with the terrain found themselves circling back to the same patches of trees repeatedly. Watches stopped. Compass needles drifted unpredictably near the eastern bank. During Prohibition, bootleggers supposedly avoided certain forest routes through Chunky Gal, even though they were faster and less patrolled. The stories become harder to separate from folklore after the Civil War, but they also become more frequent. In 1878, a surveyor from Macon County reportedly disappeared for nearly 30 hours while mapping timber boundaries near the hollow. He later claimed he had only been gone an evening. Witnesses described him as dehydrated, confused, and unable to explain where he had been. In 1912, according to local rumor, 2 boys camping near the lake returned home, insisting the stars reflected in the water before appearing in the sky above them. Their father beat them for lying. One of the boys reportedly never returned to the area again as an adult. By the 1930s, the federal government had begun acquiring and reorganizing large portions of Appalachian forest land. Roads were rerouted and trails closed. some communities vanished entirely beneath conservation projects and economic migration. Around this period, references to the hollow become noticeably inconsistent in maps and county documentation. Parcels shifted ownership repeatedly. Access roads appeared on one survey and vanished from the next. Conspiracy theories grew naturally from this confusion. Some locals became convinced the area had been quietly restricted after unusual geological findings. Others believed the government discovered underground cave systems or unstable sink formations and intentionally obscured access to avoid liability. More extreme versions connected the hollow to magnetic anomalies supposedly running along ancient fault lines beneath the Appalachians. A few tied the stories to Cherokee spiritual geography. That part is difficult to discuss responsibly because modern retellings often distort indigenous beliefs into ghost stories they were never meant to be. But multiple oral accounts do mention older warnings associated with still water in enclosed valleys. Places believed to affect memory, direction, or thought itself. Not evil, necessarily. Simply wrong for humans to remain near for too long. That distinction matters because the oldest stories never describe the lake as dangerous or aggressive. It does not attack people, and it does not drag them under. Instead, people describe a gradual narrowing of perception around it, a softening of urgency. The longer someone remains near the shore after dark, the less important leaving begins to feel. That detail appears so often, it becomes difficult to ignore. Hunters sitting too long without realizing hours had passed. Campers forgetting conversations moments after speaking. The peculiar sensation that the lake is more noticeable when you stop actively observing it. Several accounts describe people staring at the surface while simultaneously feeling as though they had already been there before. One retired ranger interviewed in the early 1980s described the experience this way. "You don't get the feeling something's watching you. You know the lake is watching you. You get the feeling something's waiting for you to notice it properly." After sunset, the descriptions become stranger. Low bubbling sounds beneath the surface without visible disturbance. Reflections slightly out of sync with movement overhead. Moonlight appearing brighter in the water than in the sky itself. One repeated claim insists the lake reflects stars obscured by cloud cover, which lines up with what those two brothers claim to have seen so many years earlier. Today, most people in the region avoid discussing the hollow in detail, especially older residents whose families have lived there for generations. Not because they necessarily believe the stories literally, but because repetition itself has become part of the caution. The mountains train people into habits. Certain roads are not taken at night. Certain places are left alone after dusk. No signs are needed. People simply know without needing them. These days, this area is actually off limits. I can't figure out exactly why, but I do know that if you're caught inside the perimeter, you're committing a crime. Like I told you, I truly don't know how much of this story is real. I know some part of it could be true, and I know most of it is probably false. Either way, I've spent years being haunted by these encounters, and I've spent years fascinated by the story of the lake and what it means to the people here. I thought it was worth sharing this investigation of mine,